Good evening. This is Snapper Carr reporting.
Hi, this is Kevin Conroy, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hey, it's Jesse Rass, and do you love comic books? Do you have opinions about comic books? Do you like hearing opinions on said comic books? Then you need to make the great escape, and it's a small leap into another world we call the Pull Bag. And you'll only find it here on the GCRN, otherwise known as the Geekcast Radio Network.
Welcome to the Pull Bag. Join us as we dig out our latest comics and discuss them with the rotating panel of the GCRN crew. So sit back and enjoy this week's Pull Bag.
Hello and welcome to the Pull Bag, only on the Geekcast Radio Network. This is episode 496, I believe. We are 4 episodes away from 500. 500 episodes of this podcast, folks. Can you believe it? I am, of course, Chief Joe and Mike. Joining me for the first time, I am popping his podcast cherry, I think, is Dave McElvenney. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mike?
I am well. I am as well as I can be, I guess. What is it I always say? Things just keep on going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny. Sometimes I wish it would stop, but it keeps going and going and going. So yes, we are in the middle of September, folks. We might actually be at the end of September, depending on the releases, because I'm recording this way in advance. And yeah, we are on our way to 500 episodes, and the 500th episode, I hope, will be, and of course I'm saying this now means I'm probably cursing myself for it not to happen, but I'm hoping it will be Michael David Sims from Earth2.net. But Dave McElvenney, comic fan, comic guru, as you are, because I've only ever heard Michael Bailey read your emails, so this is like, because this is your cherry poppin' podcast, I don't know as much, and that's why we ask these 25 questions. So did you grow up reading comics, and at what age do you first remember reading or noticing comics?
Well, I certainly grew up reading comics. As far as when I remember starting, I really don't know, because comics have been part of my life pretty much since I could read, which was about 4 years old. I grew up in a house when I was very young. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister, and then later on 2 younger sisters. And there were comic books around the house constantly, mostly from my brothers. My sister would read some, but mostly my brothers. And, it's just, I honestly don't remember a time when I wasn't reading comics.
Interesting.
So I've been pretty much reading comics for over 60 years at this point.
Wow, that's awesome. Very cool, very cool. As a kid, was there a parent, a friend, or someone who just said, "Here, kid, read this comic, go away, you bother me"?
Well, I would have to say my mom. One of the ways that, with a good-sized family, that she kept us occupied and out of her hair was probably with comic books. And when I was very young, there was, my mom used to go downtown shopping, downtown Philadelphia. And there was what was called the Reading Terminal Market. It was a market underneath the Reading Terminal train station. And they had this used bookstore. And part of their, one section of the bookstore was all old comics. I don't know if you're old enough to have seen comics with the top parts of the covers cut off.
I'm not old enough to remember that, but I have seen that because that's been a thing since obviously then.
Yeah.
So I have seen them like that, but I didn't. I maybe at a Walden Books or something in the 80s. I don't know.
Yeah, because apparently discovered later that the comic publishers would ship, things out, and when comic newsstands, dealers, whatever they were in those days, had more than they sold, they could get a refund rather than shipping the entire comic books back. They were to cut off the top like third of the cover and send those
Mm-hmm.
back. So what would often happen is they would cut those tops of the covers off to get their refund and then sell them cheap. So my mom, whenever she would go downtown, would always stop at the Reading Terminal Market and get, a whole bunch of comics of all sorts to bring home to us. I don't think she even knew for the most part what she was picking up. It was just, she would just, grab a handful of comics and, bring them home for us to devour. And we'd sit there and read them all and, swap them around from brother to brother. And, so, it was a while before I started reading comics that had their entire covers on them, but I've been reading them pretty much since I can remember.
Very cool.
A lot of that was due to my mom.
How many siblings do you have?
I am the fourth of 6 children.
Oh, wow. Okay. My mom was the fifth of 6, I think. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, when our parents, when we would say, oh, Mom, if you're going to the store, or if they left us home alone or whatever, or if they left us with a babysitter, if you stop at, again, by the 80s, we had Walden Books, we had other, some bookstores would carry comics, but most of the time you'd have to find a hole in the wall. Like I said, most of the time I remember spinning racks at Walden Books and be like, Mom, if you're going to the mall, stop in Walden Books. And she would, like you said, she would just grab a stack of them, because back then they were, what, $1.50, $1.25, whatever it is, whatever it was in the 80s and even before then. And I would, she'd bring them home and I'd, just look through them and pick out the characters that appealed to me, I guess, at the time. So speaking of characters, when you were a kid, which characters were your favorites?
Ooh, probably, I would say top of my list would be Superman. I've always loved Superman.
That man won't quit as long as he can still draw a breath. None of my teammates will. Me? I've got a different problem. I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Never allowing myself to lose control, even for a moment, or someone could die. But you can take it, can't you, big man? What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am.
Generally superheroes, Superman, Batman. Eventually, I started reading some Marvel too. Mostly I read DC, but then I started reading Marvel, and I really enjoyed the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and things like that. But pretty much, the superheroes, I would say. And
Right.
Mainly DC is kind of where I would lean, and even now, it's still my preference generally.
Oh, boy. He hasn't even seen the questions, folks, and he's already answered question 4. You got to pick DC or Marvel, because that's the age-old, look, and I'll ask this one next, but there are, right now in 2022, there are a bunch of new and established comic publishers that are not DC or Marvel, but most of the time when someone says, you read comics, they're going to think DC or Marvel, because they've been the big two since 1938 and 1939. So DC or Marvel, and why either way?
Well, I would probably have to say DC. Number one, probably because that was what I read most of first when I was very young. But and particularly DC Silver Age, that's my sweet spot. So I grew up with a very particular sort of comic reading habit, and that's kind of what I like. It's just the very basic, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. Nobody has any real moral dilemmas. All the good guys are friends and work together. It's just,
Well, I mean, there is one exception, though. I mean, after all, he is only a part-timer. Oh, Justice League animated series Batman. Gotta love it.
Well, I mean, again,
Part-timer, remember. Yeah.
I'm going back to Silver Age, like I said.
True, yes. Back then they were, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were not, it wasn't, when I started reading some Marvel, it was, even in Marvel's early Silver Age, it was uncommon to have, two people that you knew were heroes, but seeing them in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
That became much more of a Marvel thing later on.
Yeah.
But even early in the Silver Age with Marvel, you didn't really see that. They were pretty much, on the same page.
Well, again, back then I don't. So for me, just for your people who have listened to the last 495 plus episodes of this podcast know this. You don't know this, but for me, I guess I'm the Bronze Age or whatever's after the Bronze Age, because I was always a cartoon kid in the 80s. I had read maybe a few, I remember the Spider-Girl comics in the 90s. I remember a couple other things based off of, or probably where the cartoon got it from was, the comics, but, in line with the Spider-Man, the animated series kind of thing. And I have tried dipping my reading glasses into some of the older stuff, and it's not the stories, it's the art. Sometimes that old art, I don't know what it is. I guess I'm used to the more modern stuff. I don't know.
Well, I think that's probably true for most people, no matter what they like.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they started reading first that is what they really like.
Yeah.
I mean, I would guess, based on, saying you're pretty much reading in the 80s or watching cartoons in the 80s, if you picked up a, say, Superman comic book from the 1950s with Wayne Boring art, you would go, oh, this is dreadful.
Mm-hmm.
And although Wayne Boring is not by any means my favorite Superman artist, there are many people around my age or a bit older who really love Wayne Boring.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, what you really fell in love with whenever it was that you started to read and fall in love with the comics is probably, pretty much your baseline for your taste, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to have gone through all sorts of stages with comics of, oh, I love this stuff. Oh, now they've ruined it. Oh, well, some of this looks like it might be good. I'll read this. And then eventually you reach a point, or at least I have, where you go, everybody gets to like what they like, whether it's my taste or not. So, you kind of meet people where they are and see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, look, I've been saying this on almost every podcast I've recorded in the last month and a half. I do not like the current trend of, here's my hot take. There's no such thing as a hot take. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Like, seriously. Like, okay, but and at the same time, I can respect, like, okay, if you, I'll ask this later, but if somebody sits here and tells me, this is insert character name here, my favorite character because of this, and I'll be like, yeah, I never got into that character, but I still respect the fact that you like whatever character it is that you're talking about. Like, I'm not gonna, some people I know will say, why are you doing this? Or why are you watching that cartoon? Why are you reading that comic? And I'll be like, because I'm wanting to see what it's about, And the DC Marvel thing over the years, there is one thing. I know I will never get it, but I remember having the 4 issues in the 90s. If there is anything to me, until they do another one just like this or something like this, that 90s DC versus Marvel series, that 4-issue miniseries, they were, by the 90s, DC and Marvel, like you said, when you were growing up, whatever, they're pretty much black and white. The good guys are the good guys, the bad guys are the bad guys. There is no moral there's a moral compass, but it's pretty much pointed at either direction. And by the 90s, I think both companies are like, we need to switch things up a bit. We need to make it more dynamic. We need to do this. Oh, hey, let's team up and then never talk about it again, because I cannot find those 4 issues in like an eBay lot for a decent price, and the collected edition, don't even get me started. I'm like, you want $600 for what? It's crazy. But DC and Marvel, like I said, are always the big two, and they always will be. There's they'll be the big two after all of us are gone, and whoever we leave left on this earth will still inherit those comics.
Hello, folks. This is TFU and Mike, and I just wanted to cut in here because since Dave and I recorded this episode, I was able to track down a copy of DC vs. Marvel, the physical trade. I didn't pay $600, thank God, because I was never ever going to do that, but it was a higher than normal price for a almost 30-year-old trade paperback, but it is what it is. But I have it now, and I'm okay, and it will be a future episode of the podcast. Now, back to the show.
So other than DC and Marvel, who are some of your other favorite publishers?
To be honest, I don't know. I know there are a lot of other publishers, but I don't know that I've really read any others besides DC and Marvel, other than when I was very young, reading things like, because when I was young, I would read whatever my mom brought home. So I would read, the Carltons. I would read, Archie. I would read Richie Rich. I would read Classics Illustrated. I would read whatever my mom brought home in that bag. So in that sense, there were a lot of sort of minor publishers, I guess, Gold Key, Dell, whatever, that I would read. But I know the more in more modern times, there are a lot of other publishers that seem to have a lot more cachet than say, Dell or Gold Key. But I've never really read much of that, so I can't really, talk too much about that because that's just something I don't know much about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've lived long enough that you've gone through everything with this, but print or digital, which one, both, either or, and why or why not?
Ooh. Well, I love the feeling of a comic book in my hands, but at age 66, trying to read a comic book is a lot harder than it was when I was, say, 16 or 6, So for ease of reading, I have to say digital. But just for the sensory pleasure, I like especially because I like to read old comics. Not that I have a lot of old comics, but just being able to feel a comic, if it's a really old comic, to be able to smell it. I know that sounds a little weird, but old.
Oh no, it doesn't sound weird at all.
Old comics, like old books, have a particular smell about them, and it's just a really neat sensory experience. But as I said, at age 66, it's a lot harder to read those print comics than it used to be, and so being able to read something on the Kindle, especially if it's something that has the guided view, where it'll blow up the whole panel to the full screen of the Kindle. That makes life a lot easier when you're trying to read stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wish to holy hell that Amazon did not buy Comixology and screw it up. But they did, and there's nothing we can do about that, sadly.
Yep.
But it is. Yeah, no, when I started this podcast almost 10 years ago, it took me, just like everybody else, I would go to the comic shop every Wednesday. I would go to Free Comic Book Day every year. I would do, what comic people do, what us comic readers do. We interact with the community and whatever. We did, I think we've done 1 or 2 of these, but we did, I sometimes will do theme months. So usually March is like Marvelous March, and like the first Marvelous March we picked a couple of, like, 2 stories from each character. So, like, Wolverine, Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, those are the 4 characters in the first Marvelous March here inside the pull bag. And then later on, we did a couple of Punisher months. Well, my friend Amy had been telling me about Comixology and the guided view and how awesome it is and how this it is and that it is. And I'm like, okay, awesome, very cool. I will check it out at some point or another. And then we were reading for this this month, and it was like, okay, I'm sitting there in a nice little easy chair reading Welcome Back, Frank. The Omnibus, all 12 issues. That thing is heavy as hell. That thing is like a frigging brick. So I'm reading it, and I'm reading it, and I'm reading it, and I'm enjoying the story, and I'll link the episode in the post if people want to go back and listen to that episode. But that book made me go to Comixology and Digital Comics because I literally, not because of the content, but because it was so strenuous for me to hold the book, I fell asleep. The book fell out of my hand and fell out of the chair.
Wow.
It hit the carpeted floor and woke me up. I'm like, next day, I'm like, okay, I'm signing up for Comixology. That's it. Done. Yeah, The Punisher made me go digital. It's just, I don't know, man. It just seems like, it's the better route to go because it's easier. Well, like everything you just said. So it is that. All right, who are some of your favorite comics writers and why?
Ooh, let's see. I probably have to put Elliot S. Maggin at the top of my list, and only partly for his comic books, actually. Many people who know me know that one of my favorite novels is Maggin's Miracle Monday. It's a prose novel featuring Superman basically fighting the devil. And I fell in love with that book when it was first published, and which is probably over around 40 years, maybe a little older.
Oh, wow.
But I've reread that book every May since it's been published. I reread it every year during the month of May because the book takes place during the month of May. So that's my little homage to that book. But I like a lot of Maggin's comic book stories. One of the ones I really enjoy is called The Einstein Connection. And it's basically every year in March, Lex Luthor breaks out of prison and Superman goes and catches him. And in the course of this story where, like you'll see Luthor escape, you'll see Superman catch him, and it's like, a year later, basically same thing happens. Another year later, same thing happens. And eventually over the course of this, Superman discovers that Luthor is escaping every year on Albert Einstein's birthday because he wants to go see the statue of Einstein in front of the Smithsonian.
Interesting.
And so as an homage, because Einstein is kind of Luthor's hero. So Superman really figures this out and humanity catches him, but then he takes him to that statue. And then brings him back to prison, of course. But yeah, I thought that was kind of a neat touch because I always have harbored the secret hope that Superman and Lex Luthor would become friends again, as they were once when they were both boys in Smallville in the Silver Age continuity. So I love Maggin. Let's see, who else? Gil Kane. He's done some really good stuff. Aside from his artwork, he's done, some good writing. Edmund Hamilton, who is if you've got a science fiction kind of based story, Edmund Hamilton's really a good guy to go to. He wrote a lot of Legion of Superheroes stories. And he also did a fair number of Superman and I think possibly Superboy stories back in the day. Again, this is kind of all Silver Age.
Right.
I'm trying to think as far as, say, Bronze Age, maybe, well, late Silver Age, early Bronze Age. I enjoyed a lot of the Cary Bates stories in the Flash comics. He would always have stories with some kind of interesting twist at some point. But again, you have to remember how old I am, because when I first started reading comics, for the most part, the reader didn't have any idea who the writer was. There weren't credits. So, I mean, the only credit I ever saw when I was really young was, Batman by Bob Kane, and of course you come to find out later on, he really wasn't doing a whole lot with Batman by the time I was reading it, but he had a contract where he got credit, where for the most part, it probably wasn't until much later that people started getting credit.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't like I think it was like the last 10 years that Bill started getting credit for.
For Bill Finger, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, I don't mind when there are two writers on something or two artists on, like, artists, it's easier because obviously artists, like, the biggest example I can give you is that Alex Milne, who did the Transformer stuff for IDW in the last 17 years, he has a specific style. Another artist that I know, Livio Remendelli, who also does Transformer stuff, he has a specific style. But whenever there are two writers on books, I'm like, who am I? Like, take Gates of Gotham. It's Scott Snyder and Kyle Higgins. Well, to me, I hear, because I had interviewed Kyle back in 2013, and when I was reading Gates of Gotham, after I had talked to Kyle, because Kyle's a big Batman the Animated Series fan and big Nightwing fan and that kind of stuff. Obviously, Kyle wrote New 52 Nightwing. I hear Lauren Lester from the cartoon in my head, and I hear Kyle's style of writing in Gates of Gotham more than Scott's. So it's always weird to me when there are two writers on one book.
Yeah, and that makes it harder to distinguish.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, I just realized, let me correct something I said a few moments ago when I was giving you some of my favorite writers. I said Gil Kane, which is nuts, of course, because he wasn't a writer. My brain was saying Gardner Fox, and my mouth said Gil Kane. So I don't know why I did that.
Oh, there you go. Gardner Fox has some amazing stuff out there.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. All right, what's next? Let's see here. We've got, continuing on with stories and writers and whatever. What defines a good story to you? Like, what pulls you in?
Ooh, what pulls me into a story?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's hard to say, because what I like in a story isn't necessarily something you see right at the beginning to pull you in. I like a story that gives me something that I would not have thought of. In the course of a story, you know how a lot of times you're reading something or watching a TV show, and 15 minutes in, you go, okay, I know exactly where this is going. And many times, it goes exactly the way you were thinking it would go.
Yep.
I like a story that sets up expectations, but then thwarts those expectations in some interesting or surprising way. I can't think offhand of too many comic book stories that do that right off the top of my head, but I don't know if you watch the CW series Superman and Lois.
I do.
But
I need to catch up, but I do.
The writers of that show do that sort of thing perfectly, where they set things up, and in the hands of lesser writers, you would go, okay, I see where this is going. But they make you think it's going one way, and then at a certain point, they take a hard turn where you go, that wasn't what I thought. And this is even better than what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things where like I've said this before, it's the Superman television show we have deserved for over 75 years.
Yeah.
It just is. I mean, there have been other Superman TV shows and cartoons and whatever, and those are good in their own way. Say what you want about. See, the thing with me is, I'm more about the fiction than I am about whatever the person is playing the character. Just because he's an asshole now doesn't mean I don't have to dislike Clark in Lois and Clark.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's the entertainment that draws me in. It's not like back in the 80s and 90s and even earlier, nobody knew. You look at Looney Tunes. Nobody knew that Mel Blanc did most, if not all, of the male voices. Obviously, because he's credited as the only voice actor on almost every single Looney Tunes cartoon until June 4A came around doing, Granny and some of the other ones. But, like, we're there to see Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Yeah.
We're not there to get into the performers' personal lives. It was always a thing for me as a kid in the 80s. My mom taught me, mind your own business. I don't know. I'm on a tangent at this point, and I don't know, man. It just irks me. Like, oh, you like that show, but that person that plays that character is a monster in real life. But I'm watching a TV show from 40 years ago.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's
fiction. Like, somebody wrote this. Somebody like, it is like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible to enjoy the art and not particularly like the artist.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. All right. Speaking of artists, what are some of your favorite comics artists? Or who are some of your favorite comics artists?
Well, probably, again, going back to my roots, Curt Swan. Because for the most part, when I was growing up, he was the Superman artist. You could always tell a Curt Swan drawn comic book. There was no way to mistake him for somebody else. So it was, in a sense, it was because you recognize that and you go, okay, that's Superman, because that was kind of the house style was set by Curt Swan in those days. So you go, okay, that's Superman. Obviously, the guy who drew that is the guy who draws Superman. And, eventually that becomes comforting and you get used to it, to the point where if you were reading what in the old days were the 80-page giants or annuals, and you'd see an old story from, before you were born, and it was drawn by a different artist, you'd go, what the heck is this? Like, I had that reaction, I think, probably the first time I saw a Wayne Boring drawn comic, because it's clearly different from Curt Swan. And you're looking at it going, well, this isn't right. This doesn't look right, aside from the fact that Superman is running through the sky instead of flying. But, because that's what Wayne Boring drew. But it's just not what you're used to. And then eventually you get used to the idea that there are different people drawing the comics, whether I just use Superman just because that's kind of my main point of reference. But beyond Curt Swan, I would say I love Neil Adams. I mean, he took things in a completely different direction than Curt Swan, and I loved it. I would say John Byrne to some extent. I'm of an age where I was not thrilled with the Byrne reboot and, Man of Steel and that stuff. But I have to credit him as an artist. He draws a really good Superman. And I'm sure, other characters that he draws too. Trying to think who else. Some people have styles that I find odd but interesting. Tim Sales. I remember seeing somebody had recommended a Superman book that he had done. And my first reaction was, oh my God, that's not Superman, because he was gigantic. I mean, he was this massive, blocky guy.
Wow.
And you look at it and you go, well, how does anybody see Clark Kent and not know he's Superman? Because they have the same unique build. Like, just forget the glasses and the hair and everything else. You'd go, that blows the whole secret identity out of the water. But it's an interesting style, and I kind of like it, which I wouldn't have thought that I would.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just eventually, as I said, as you age, you start to at least be more open to different things that you probably wouldn't have liked as a younger man, and as somebody in their teens or early 20s would probably railed against, because that's what people in those ages often do. Whereas now, when I'm in my 60s, I go, just calm down, give yourself another few years, and you'll be okay. You still might not like it, and that's fine, but you won't be, yelling at clouds.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of, and even though I'm not there yet, I'm not in my 60s yet, but you know who Jeff Dunham is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so reminds me of Walter, one of Jeff's characters. Damn kids with your hipping and your hopping, and pull up your damn pants, you morons. Like, that's, but again, when I say that in fun, and I say that because it's like, it's one of those things. Why, in my day,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, and my day with comics is only like full time. It's only been since I started this podcast in 2013. Like, I've only been knee deep or arms deep in comics for the last 9.5, 10 years, but I've tried my best to not just read whatever is coming out. And like I said, when we did the first Marvelous March, it was not for the man who has everything is Superman. What's the Captain America book? It's oh god, it's one of the Captain America, but like Spider-Man Blue or Wolverine Origins, the Chris Claremont stuff, and it's like, okay, I'm going to open myself up to various things, and some things I like, some things I don't like, and that's okay, and it'll all be all right. What is your favorite run of a series? So by this I mean something like, and I'm only going to use Batman because I only know Batman numbers, but something like Batman 515 to 5, you know what I mean? Like, what's your favorite run of a story run of a comic?
Well, again, my age is showing, because again, Silver Age for the most part, and even to some extent in Bronze Age, what I'm most used to are done in ones. I'm used to, what I like most from, my childhood is, picking up an action or a Superman or a Batman or whatever, and reading, 2 or sometimes 3 stories that in a single issue that were not in any way generally related to each other, let alone stories that were continued from one issue to another. But even in the Silver Age, and this is a backup strip in Action, when after Supergirl was introduced in, I can't remember the number anymore, of Action Comics, she was for a long time the backup in Action. She had her own stories in Action Comics. Superman was, the main story, but Supergirl had her own series. And they did something that was quite unusual in those days, in that they started at a certain point to do connected stories. They weren't the kind that are done nowadays, or even that were done in, say, the late Bronze Age, but she would have adventures that worked along a theme. if you know the character, you know that in the early days, she was basically Superman's secret weapon, and she, did all her super deeds in secret until, Superman was sure that she knew how to use her powers and, all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
there was a series of stories basically where you could see her character progressing, where she started out in an orphanage, because of course, when your one and only relative from your exploded planet comes to visit and live, you don't take her in, you stick her in an orphanage because that's what you do. So she was living in an orphanage, and over the course of that, there were some stories where people would come and try to adopt her, and she would sabotage the adoption process because, she didn't want anybody to adopt her and then figure out that she was Supergirl. And then she did eventually get adopted by the Danvers. And in the beginning, she didn't let them know that she was Supergirl. But then eventually, something happened. I think they were about to be in a car wreck, and she was in the car with them as Linda Danvers, and, got out and saved them, and they were nonplussed, of course. And she was all upset because, Superman was going to be mad at her because she revealed her secret identity. And he drops in and says, no, this is fine. I was coming to tell you anyway. You probably should tell your parents who you really are, because, my parents growing up knew who I was. And then she went through a series of adventures where he was going to reveal her existence to the world, but she lost her powers, and then she managed to get them back. But all these stories formed a kind of long-running story arc, which, as I said, was very unusual for the time, but it was one of those things that you really wanted to make sure you got the next issue of Action so that you could see where it was going to go. It was possible to miss because, distribution was terrible in those days, but you could make up for it because they would often do a recap at the beginning of a story to say, you might remember last issue when she did this, because they knew the distribution was terrible and not everybody got every issue. But it was that was a fascinating thing. And if you I don't know if you have any of the archive editions, those are, even when they were being published originally, they were a little pricey, but now they're ridiculous. But the volume 2 of the Supergirl Archives edition really shows kind of that arc and that theme of the storyline from those days. So that's kind of cool. But as far as things like Court of Owls or, any of that stuff, I've sort of dipped in and out of those, but they're, and I've been, I've read some of them and I like some of them and didn't like some of them. And, it's not my sort of, like I say, not my sweet spot, really. I'm really a Silver Age guy at heart.
Yeah. Again, for me, if I'm presented with two choices, I will pick one and I will stick with that one. And for me as a kid, and I've seen it. I've seen the other one that I didn't choose, but my main 80s fandom is Transformers. You present me with Transformers or G.I. Joe, pick. Okay, giant robots from a robotic planet come to Earth. That sounds better than, the military versus the bad guys. And I'm not saying anything wrong with that. I'm just saying I'm the type of person that if you put two things in front of me and I choose something, that biggest example I can give you, and I know I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this on this podcast before, in the year 2000, I was living in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I went to Books A Million at the time, and the older lady clerk who was blonde, her name was Angie, and she asked me what I like reading. Well, by the year 2000, I was reading R.L. Stine. I was 20 years old, but up until then, I was reading R.L. Stine Fear Street and John Grisham novels and this. So she presented me with two choices: a boy wizard or a former lingerie buyer turned bounty hunter? At 20 years old in the year 2000, do you know which one I chose?
I'm going with the lingerie, but a wild guess.
So, obviously, Boy Wizard, Harry Potter, the former lingerie buyer turned bounty hunter is Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum novels. And I need to catch up with the Plum novels, but ever since I've made that choice, I've never regretted it. I've never had any, like, it's not for me, it's not about like or dislike when I don't know about something or when I'm not interested in something. I don't care. Like, I don't care how good or bad Harry Potter may be. I've never experienced it. And honestly, I have no ambition to experience it, kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, we all make choices.
Oh, yeah.
So
Everybody's got stuff they like and stuff that they either dislike or just are,
ambivalent
apathetic
to.
about. It's like, I don't care
Yep.
about that. I'm not saying it's
Yep.
bad. It just doesn't interest me.
Absolutely. What is one comic you can read over and over again, single issue or trade?
Ooh, let's see. Over and over again. I would probably have to say The Amazing Story of Superman Red and Superman Blue, which to this day I maintain that if they decided they wanted to end the old continuity before the reboot, before the Byrne reboot, that I think that would have been a better ending than whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, because it's basically a wish fulfillment. Everything that you could possibly, every good thing you could possibly want for Superman happens in that story. He gets to marry both Lois and Lana because he gets split into two people. He gets to recreate the planet of Krypton. He gets to repopulate it by enlarging the bottle city of Kandor on the recreated Krypton. He gets one of the two Supermen created in the story gets to go back to Krypton and live out the rest of his life there, while the other one remains on Earth with his superpowers. He manages to eliminate evil and crime from Earth. He manages to help. Actually, I was going to say he helps Lex, but Lex Luthor helps him to cure all diseases. And actually, even Lex manages to regrow his hair. But it's and both versions of Superman in their happily married lives end up, with family. They both have kids, and it's just every happy ending you could possibly want for Superman you get in that comic. It is, as they say, an imaginary story. I will not quote Alan Moore on that because I think he's wrong about them all being imaginary. No, they're not.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, as you're telling the story, as you're talking about this, my first thought was, oh well, what if the Superman clone from Superman 3 wasn't evil? Oh man, we do have to ask some. I don't want to, well, I'm just going to say negative things, but not to be negative. But are there any comics that you avoid altogether? You just look at it and be like, nope, don't care, not for me, walk away.
Ooh, do you mean like a particular title or a particular issue?
Just, whatever. Like you go in the comic shop and you see new issues of your favorite Superman title, your favorite Batman title, your favorite this, favorite that, and then you see something that you don't know about or something, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, I'm going to avoid this one.
I don't know. I would probably say, and this is a bit unfair because I've never actually read one of these, but pretty much anything with the Punisher, because I'm not big on the concept of anti-hero. And,
Okay.
I've read stuff about the Punisher, and everything I've read says to me, you wouldn't like that. So I would have to say something like that, because that's just not my cup of tea. Again, if people like it, good for them, but I don't think I would enjoy it. So I just would leave it sit on the stand.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, some of these are like, because again, we all, like we've been saying, everyone has likes and dislikes. And, for me, I'm not going, like, for me, comics now, and it's been this way since I started this podcast, comics are all about characters to me. Like, again, you take DC. I have done exactly, I think, ever in the history of this podcast, 2 episodes on Superman, and we didn't even finish. It was a 3-issue story. We never finished it. We're gonna finish it eventually, but it was Frank Miller tried to Batman Superman. Not Unchained. That was Snyder. It's Unbound, I think. Superman Unbound. I don't remember. It was something where it was one of those early DC Dark Black Label things where it was just 3 issues, and my buddy Joe and I was kind of excited to check it out because all as I had ever heard about Frank Miller and all as I've ever read from Frank Miller is, oh, I'm going to make Batman dark, or I'm going to do this to Batman, or Batman's doing, like, you know what? I respect the man for working on what he's worked on, but yikes, dude. So many Batmans, like, literally, like, you mentioned John Byrne. John Byrne, obviously synonymous with Superman. Frank Miller, it's like, that's the first Batman comic name anyone almost ever brings up because he is who he is. So, how large or small is your physical comic book collection?
Ooh, this is going to be very disappointing to you, I imagine. It's very, very small.
Oh, wow.
It's just over the years. First of all, I was never what I think of as a collector. I was a reader. I would get the comics, I would read them, and if I really liked them, I would read them until they were basically tatters.
Okay.
Because I would just read them over and over again, and if I didn't particularly like them, I would often just give them away. Go, here, you want to read these? I'm done with them. I do have some physical comics, mainly through the generosity of friends. I have a friend, one of my former teaching colleagues, who goes to Comic Cons a lot in various different places. And he knows some of my taste. He knows, for example, that I love Elliot S. Maggin, and he knows that I love the character of Superwoman that Maggin created. So he has gotten the creators, artists, and writers to autograph copies of the DC Comics Presents annuals that she appears in, which is very generous of him, I think. But hopefully he's not going to be listening to this because they're basically sitting on a shelf, and I don't really look at them because I've read the stories and I know them. And I have some some archive editions of different collections that I like, but I don't really have a lot because, for the most part, the comics that I love are still in my head. I have what many people have told me is a freakish memory, and if somebody describes a cover of a comic that I read or a storyline, I will remember very quickly and be able to tell the basic storyline of the comic. I had one of my very closest friends that I used to teach with. He was an English teacher. We became very good friends. One drive, actually, I was driving him up to Philadelphia. He had was coming up to interview someone for a book that he was working on, and he knew I knew how to get to where the interview was. So I was like, "I'll drive you, sure." And we got talking about comic books, and he said, "There's a comic that I sort of remember, but I'm not sure if it's a real comic or if I've just made it up in my imagination." He said, here's the cover. And he said, and all I can remember is the cover. I couldn't tell you the story. He said, it's Batman carrying the body of Robin on this alien planet with a red sun behind him. As soon as he said that, I went, oh, Robin dies at dawn. He goes, what? I said, that's Robin dies at dawn. That's a real Batman comic. You didn't make that up. That's a real comic. That's a very evocative cover. If you read that comic as a kid, you will always remember that cover because it's just like startling.
Yeah.
And then I proceeded to tell him basically the story of the that was in the comic. And I said, sadly, the story is not as good as the cover. The cover is terrific. The story is basically a very, run of the mill for its time, sort of Batman kind of science fiction-y story. But it's not a real good story. But the comic is terrific, the cover of the comic. And based on that conversation, we became very good friends, and, we talk comic books a lot now. So most of the comics that I read and care about and love, I just keep in my head. Takes up a lot less storage space that way. And that keeps my wife happy.
So, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Sometimes it's all about the cover art and not the content of the book. Like, for me, like, we obviously now live in an age where everything is online and you can whatever. Like, I'm fine having a JPEG or a PNG photo file of, let's just say, New 52 Nightwing Volume 1 or Volume 3, whatever. Any of the Alex Garner Batgirl covers, I'm fine just having JPEGs of those because I can just look at them on my computer and admire the art and whatever else. I'm not saying that those Batgirl books are bad at all. What I'm saying is we now live in an age where you're like, if you've already read that comic and you're like, yeah, it's not so good, but I still like the cover, then, well, you can get you can find the image online or whatever else.
Yeah.
So on that same line, I actually skipped this question because I wasn't sure how we were going to come around to it. But now that you've said what you've said, are there any comics in the past or currently that you wish you had not read them?
Ooh, well, this is tough because just recently, John Wilson in his Superman in Crisis podcast, where he's covering Crisis on Infinite Earths and the related appearances of Superman during that time period, he just recently covered Crisis number 7, which you may remember involves the death of Supergirl. And even now, I regard that as the worst comic book reading day of my life because I love the character of Supergirl.
Right.
And that was like a kick in the stomach reading that. But I can't say that I wish I hadn't read it because that whole series, Crisis on Infinite Earths, was such an important milestone. Even at the time I was reading it, because when you're reading it as it's coming out monthly and the different books are tying in, you don't entirely know what's going on at any given moment or where the story is going. And you certainly don't know where it's going to end up. So, but you certainly know at the time that this is a big deal. This is an important series. You have to read this. So I knew that. Mm-hmm. So I can't say I wish I hadn't read that. On the other hand, there is a comic that I read that often shows up on lists of best Superman stories ever that I wish I hadn't read. And it's a 2-issue one, and it's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which I referenced earlier when I said the Superman Red, Superman Blue would have been a better way to end the continuity than that.
Right, yeah.
That story, to me, is just almost unreadable because it is a totally passive and ineffective Superman throughout almost the entire story. For the most part, Superman sits around, mopes, and does nothing while other people are trying to do things, which to me, that's not the Superman I want to see. I know people like that story, but for me, doesn't. And the fact that in the course of that story, it's bad enough in Crisis number 7 that I got to see Supergirl die. But in Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, you pretty much get to see almost everyone in Superman's supporting cast die, with very few exceptions. I mean, Pete Ross, Lana Lang, Jimmy Olsen, Lex Luthor, Crypto, for crying out loud. It's an ineffective Superman, and it's basically just death after death after death, partly because Superman's not doing it.
Right, yeah.
So if I could remove that from my memory, I would gladly do it. I can't, but that's a story I definitely wish I had never read.
Interesting. What is the one comic you could never live without ever? So basically how I phrase this, and obviously now that you've said you don't have much of a collection, but from what you do have, everybody is safe, your wife, your family, your pets, whatever, but the house is on fire. What's the one comic you'd run in to save because you just can't live without it?
Ooh, that's a tough one with modern technology because...
Well, yes, but yeah.
You could probably get any, you could replace just about anything, it would depend on the cost, I suppose. That would be difficult. Probably, I guess, just because of the attachment to the story and to the person who gave it to me, I would probably get the two DC Comics Presents annuals with Superwoman in them that my friend Ted had gotten autographed for me and gave me. But that's probably more a sentimental choice just because of the gesture rather than, the quality of the story. Just, there's a connection there. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're gonna run back into your burning house and you're gonna save a memory, it's gonna be the one that matters the most to you.
Yeah, I would probably say that. But again, unless I get, unless I become, an Alzheimer patient, I still have pretty much all my comics in my head, so I don't have to worry about them burning. But yeah, that would probably be it. Yeah.
It's not. So I was looking this up to see, and I'm pretty sure what it is you have a photographic memory, but there are also other terms for, you saying, you have your comics in your head, you can, access them fairly easily and remember the stories and everything else. And I thought it was an eidetic memory, but eidetic memory is only like you remember it very clearly and vividly, but only for a little while. So I don't know. Well, it is what it is.
It's not that, I have to say, because I've pondered this question myself because some people have said, well, you must have a photographic memory. I'm like, no, absolutely not. Pretty much the opposite. I said, I have no visual memory at all. I cannot close my eyes and see things in my mind the way apparently most people can. I basically encode everything as sound. I can remember pretty much anything I've ever heard if I work hard at remembering it. I can remember conversations I've had decades ago, but I can't see pictures in my head. When I was very young, I discovered that this was odd. When you have an experience all your life, you don't think that's odd. You think that's normal. But somehow my brother and I were talking about something, one older brother, and he was talking about, well, picture such and such in your mind. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, like imagine you can see this. And I said, well, you can't see things inside your head. That's crazy. He's like, yeah, everybody does. I said, no, that's called hallucinating. That means you're crazy. If you can see things in your head, there's something wrong with you because I can't do that. And he said, well, when you think how do you think? I said, I hear my voice in my head. He said, well, if you hear voices in your head, you're crazy. So my brother cannot remember, cannot hear things in his head. He's an engineer. He's very visual. So to him, everything is, what does it look like? And that's how he remembers everything. For me, and this, I know this sounds weird for comic books, but everything for me is, what's the sound? And for me, when I'm reading, whether it's a comic book or a novel or a textbook or whatever, when I read, I hear my own voice in my head as if I were narrating. And that's how I remember things.
Interesting.
So it's definitely not photographic. I often describe it as phonographic because it's all sound-based, but I'm not sure how it is that somehow the sound in my head also manages somehow to encode what I saw, but I don't actually see it in my head. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Well, that's like with me. Like when I'm reading, depending on what style, but let's just say DC Animated Universe style of a comic, like when they did Batman Beyond 2.0 number of years ago. Like I hear Will Friedel's Batman Beyond in my head as I'm reading the character. I hear, when I see old Bruce, I hear Kevin Conroy's voice in my head as I'm reading the character because I know the person writing that book, who was, again, Kyle Higgins, he loves that series and that style and whatever, and he was telling a certain story at the time, and, I always hear, like, they had, I don't know how many issues it was supposed to be, but they had Batman 89 and Superman 78. They were supposed to be miniseries or something or whatever. Well, Batman 89, you show me a picture with that Batman font and how Michael Keaton looked in that suit, then when I read that comic, I'm going to hear Michael Keaton's voice in my head every time he talks as Batman. Same thing with Superman 78. I'm going to hear Christopher Reeve in my head.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So, yeah, it's all, for me, everything is about sound. It's all like podcasting. I'm an audio podcaster. I don't need video. I don't need this. Video makes it harder for me personally, kind of thing. And I've been doing audio for the last 14 years or so, coming up on this December. So yeah, it's really all about sound. What was the most money you spent on a comic or a comic item? A comic item could be a Superman statue, a Green Lantern ring, or a Green Lantern lantern, or something like that.
I'm incredibly cheap, so I would really have to stretch for that. I mean, I remember when I remember the days when comics hit, like $1, and I was like, this is insane, because I grew up when they were, for the most part, 12 cents. But I would probably an archive edition, because I did get several of those over the years. And fortunately, I got them at the time of their publication rather than in the secondary market, which, again, is outrageous for the most part, even when you can find them. So I would think, I'm trying to remember how much they were when I was buying them. Probably around $30 to $35, maybe. I mean, they were expensive, but they're certainly high quality.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably about the highest I would ever have spent for anything like that.
Very cool, very cool. Was there ever a moment in your life where you were done with comics? Like you just got so disinterested that you just wanted to walk away?
Ooh, well, let's see. After, I almost did after whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. But I thought, well, they're going to do this reboot. Let me see what it's like. And I read Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries, and I kind of liked it. It wasn't what I was used to. It's a very, very different take from, my Silver and Bronze Age Superman, but clearly they were done with that version of Superman at that point. Although he did have some things that were obviously taken from that or adapted from those earlier continuities. So I stuck with comics and particularly Superman for maybe another 10 years, which in retrospect might have been a little longer than I should have. But so I went all the way, I went, through Byrne's time on Superman after Man of Steel when he was writing the Superman in action. And I went through that and I found myself enjoying it less and less. And even after he left that book, I was still reading it. But I just was like, and I don't know if it was just I was too stuck in what I had lost, quote unquote, with the old continuity, or if it was just my age, because probably by the mid 90s, I was pretty much ready to go, yeah, I'm getting too old for this, or I'm just not enjoying it. Because by that point, I was about 40, which, in those days was probably a little on the old side to still be reading comics on a regular basis. I don't know. Probably younger people than I would still be reading them at that age. But, in my mind, it was still kind of a kid's entertainment. So probably about the mid 90s, I was just like, yeah, I think I'm done. I might occasionally pick something up if I saw a cover that looked really interesting, but pretty much stopped until I guess around the time when Action 1000 came out. Because again, that was like a big deal. I mean, I would stop in comic shops periodically, just mainly looking at back issue bins to see like, hey, is there something here that, I want to reread from my days. And I would look at, whatever was on the shelves. But when I knew that when Action Comics 1000 was coming out, I'm like, well, let me get that. So I did. And I kind of liked it, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I thought, well, I will see where this goes. So I stuck with that for about a year with Brian Michael Bendis. But I even remember posting on Facebook in those early days with Bendis. I said, I read Action 1000 and I decided I want to stick with this to see where it goes. But this Brian Michael Bendis guy is on a short leash with me. So we'll see where it goes. Because again, probably because of my age and my formative years, I'm not a huge fan of what they call the decompressed storytelling.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm used to, I get 3 terrific stories in one comic, and now I'm not even getting one story in 5 comics, so I gave that about a year, and then I was like, nah, I'm not enjoying this. I should stop because I can't see hate reading it. Not that I hated it, but I can't see reading it if I'm not enjoying it. So I pretty much stopped, and I'm at the point now where if I see something that looks interesting, or if somebody whose opinion I value says, hey, maybe you'd like to read this, I will read it. But I'm not reading anything regularly. The last thing I read, and it was years after it was published, was Milestone Comics Icon, with basically their alternate take on Superman, which I found fascinating. I really loved that. But then that was kind of it for a while. And then I saw that DC was doing an updated version of Icon called Icon and Rocket. So I recently just finished reading that miniseries, which I did not enjoy as much as the original that I read. So we'll see if I stick with that stuff again. But I'm kind of, for the most part now, it's like I'm not reading anything on a regular basis. But, if somebody says, hey, take a look at this, I might pick it up. Or if I'm in the library, my local library stocks graphic novels like crazy. I recently read there's a new, new to me, Mr. Miracle graphic novel that was a whole different take on Mr. Miracle, and I enjoyed that. So I will kind of browse their stacks and look at the graphic novels and see what looks interesting.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So I know you're like Superman is your number one character, but how do you feel about certain Batman stuff? Like, the reason why I'm saying this is because have you read Sean Murphy's White Knight universe stuff?
No, I haven't read that.
Okay. I think, I don't know, you may or may not like it. The first one, White Knight, and then Curse of the White Knight, and he's currently doing Beyond the White Knight. So, White Knight was, I think he said it was like a political thriller, and the second one was like supposed to be some other kind of thriller, and then this one that he's doing now is supposed to be like a psychological thriller. But if there's any comic universe that I'm currently reading, it's his, because it's the most refreshing Batman universe. It's not just like, because he didn't know, he put Todd as the first Robin and then Grayson as the second Robin.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool. I highly suggest, if you're looking for a different kind of Batman story, it's very interesting. And he takes Joker and Jack. They're the same guy, but it's, the Jack persona and the Joker persona. So, it's very, very cool. It's very, very fun. Heroes, heroines, or villains? What archetypes are your go-to reads?
Probably not surprising, but pretty much heroes. I mean, heroes and heroines I think of as basically the same kind of thing. I don't, it's not like I'm going to go, girls are icky, I'm not reading this, but heroes, but you need villains too, because it's hard to be heroic without, some sort of evil to fight against. But I like heroes, and I like heroes that are unambiguously heroes. I like heroes that, to put it as I usually do, heroes who do right for no other reason than because it's right. That's the only motivation they need. I don't need, for the most part, psychologically complex heroes. I want heroes who see the right and do the right. I mean, I get that not all heroes are like that, especially the, several decades long take on Batman of like, he's psychologically scarred by his parents' death. And so, that put him on his path. Again, I read a lot of goofy science fiction Batman in the 60s. So, I'm also fine with a more cheerful Batman. But yeah, I lean more toward the heroes than villains. Although I do have a grudging admiration for Lex Luthor, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, so I took out part of that question because you already stated that you're not really an anti-hero person. So basically, again, that question is about comic book archetypes. And yes, heroes, heroines, they're all heroes, they're all whatever, but it's not necessarily saying, do you prefer one over the other? Which one do you go to the most kind of thing? And obviously for you, it's all about Superman and Supergirl and that whole universe. It's just one of those things where when I phrased that question, I was trying to think of specific types of, like, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, they're all heroes. Supergirl, even superhero heroine is just, it's either a drug or it's a name for you know what I mean. Yeah. Like it's one of those things where, like, male and female, they're opposite, whatever kind of things. And I was trying to figure out Batman is not the same as, say, somebody from an original graphic novel that may want to be a hero but turns out to be something. Like, I was trying to figure out, like, examples of comic archetypes, and between heroes, heroines, anti-heroes, and villains, those were the four that I decided to use.
Well, I mean, there's, I say with heroes, there are, and I've heard people come up with different sort of subcategories, but there's like, street level heroes versus like, global or cosmic heroes. Like there's Spider-Man as opposed to Silver Surfer. Like they're both heroes, but the kind of things that Silver Surfer does and the kind of things that Spider-Man does are completely different. Partly because of their realms, partly because of their powers. But yeah, you're not going to, it's like even in the Justice League, you've got like, Green Arrow versus Martian Manhunter, like there's a big difference between them. They're both heroes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's always, different levels, like you said, and it's great that, even though I mentioned earlier about, in the Justice League cartoon, Batman's like, I'm a part-timer. He also said, call me when you need me, and you will. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things where Batman is the way Batman is, Superman's the Boy Scout, Wonder Woman is this. I don't want to say she's a lost little girl, but she's having to explore man's world because she was always on Themyscira. So she's more of like a learner type of thing. Green Arrow, very street level, very like, back at street level, sort of sunny versus Batman street level where Batman's all dark and brooding and, down here kind of thing. And it's just all fun. And I mean, some anti-heroes can be fun. I just think that some of them have such a history now that it's like, should I really be reading this kind of thing? I don't know. Do you have a my parents got rid of my comic story?
Oh, heavens, no. I can't imagine that. Like I said, my mom basically fed my comic book habit when I was very young, before, until I started having money of my own and can buy my own. But no, I don't think my mom would ever have gotten rid of my comics or books. She was very big on let the kids read whatever they want to read. We had, we had an old suitcase that basically was filled with comic books all the time. And, they would get traded around to the neighborhood. But, we had bookshelves all over the place. I think there were books in just about every room of our house. So she was pretty big on reading. And, 3 of the 6 of us went to college. So I figure that worked out okay as far as she was concerned.
Hey, 3 out of 6 ain't bad, apparently. Yeah, and I mean that question comes from my other podcast where I talk about toy collecting, and it's do you have a my parents got rid of my toys story, because I have one of those stories, and it's it's more of one of those types of moms that doesn't know that you love, like she knows you love these, but okay, you have this entire Batman stack over here, and you have this entire Superman stack on the opposite side of the room. Pick 10 of them to go in the yard sale. you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's that kind of thing where it's like, oh crap, my mom's having a yard sale. I gotta rush home, grab my cape, and protect my comics.
No,
kind of thing.
No, I don't. I do have my mom got rid of a toy, but I don't have my mom got rid of a comic story. So.
Very cool. Very cool. What is one item from a comic book you'd love to have in the real world? So something that can be scaled, like just pulled right out of the comic and it's in your hand, like a Batarang or Superman's cape or Green Lantern's ring or Green Lantern's, that kind of stuff.
Ooh, let's see. My first thought is a toss-up between Green Lantern's ring or a Legion of Superheroes flight ring. Now, let me try and think about that for a second. I mean, the Green Lantern ring, obviously, you can do a lot more with. The flight ring just lets you fly, which Green Lantern's ring will let you do that. So I guess I'd have to go with Green Lantern, but it has to come with a power battery.
Well, yeah, I mean, come on. How do you...
Otherwise, 24 hours later, you're screwed.
Yeah, absolutely. You are screwed. Only takes 24 hours. All right. So, if you could... So, after all your years reading comics and consuming comics... Wow, I almost said costumes. If you could create any comic storyline, what would you want to create, and what characters would you want to create it with? So basically, you go into DC's offices, you talk to the Jim Lees or the Jeff whatevers, and they say, okay, you can do whatever you want with these characters. Here's the keys to the kingdom. What story would you want to do?
Ooh, wow. That would be tough. But I think, given my love of Superman and my admiration for Lex Luthor, I think I would have somebody do a story where somehow, and I would leave this up to the writer because I'm not a writer and I don't even know how you would do it, but somehow Superman and Lex Luthor become good friends again. Really, like not a trick, not a dream, not an imaginary story, none of that. They really become friends. And they go on adventures together, either fighting crime, because if you've got Lex Luthor as a good guy now, he certainly has a knowledge of crime and criminals. And if he's got, if he's working with Superman on his side, imagine what they could do. But it doesn't have to be just crime fighting. Like they could go explore space. They could, between Luthor's genius and Superman, whatever kind of lab Superman has in his Fortress of Solitude, they could come up with some of the most amazing things, I'm sure. I think I'd like to see something like that. Maybe even just make it a little mini series where they go on a kind of super road trip, whether it's around the world and get involved in all sorts of adventures and hijinks, or they go across the galaxy. But Superman and Lex Luthor as good friends.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, that would be awesome.
It would have to be completely out of continuity, of course.
Well, I mean, yeah,
because that takes Lex Luthor off the table as a villainous character. But
yeah, it would definitely have to be Elseworlds or in some other it would have to be. Oh, so Sean Gordon Murphy has his Batman White Knight universe. And, it would have to be him going from Batman to Superman and him creating his own Superman universe kind of thing. Yeah.
But I would read that, and I would hope I wouldn't be the only one who would.
It sounds like a promising, thing. So who is your favorite voice actor who plays Lex, and who is your favorite live action actor who plays Lex?
That is tough. I really, as far as live action, I really like Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville. I think he was a really good Lex. It's not, he's not the kind of Lex I quite grew up with, but I really enjoyed him as that character. But part of me really enjoys, and again, this is way before your time, but you may know it, Lyle Talbot as Lex Luthor in the Kirk Allen serials.
No, I've never seen those.
He was very much the image of the golden age Lex Luthor as the mad scientist in the white lab coat and bald and heavy set. And that's, to me, that's what Lex Luthor should look like for the most part. So as far as live action, I'd probably go with Rosenbaum, just because I thought he was really good, and he obviously had a longer tenure as the character than pretty much anybody.
10-year run. He has the longest run. Yeah. I mean, outside, 96 to 2004. What is that? Almost 8 years. Yeah. So if you count, and again, I'm counting animation, but just overall, an actor who has done Lex, yes, Rosenbaum from 2001 to 2011 is the longest. The second longest would be Clancy Brown, voicing him in the DC Animated Universe, because he started in Superman and he ended in Justice League or Justice League Unlimited. I forget which one.
And as far as voice actor, I think I would have to go with Clancy Brown. I think he had
absolutely
just the vocal quality that was just, he had that kind of smarmy evil about him that, that's Lex Luthor. Like, he just has such disdain for pretty much everybody because he thinks everybody is beneath him. And that really comes through with Clancy.
Oh, absolutely it does, yeah. Clancy is amazing.
Okay. I'm trapped in a building full of supervillains. I've lost my powers, and for some reason, this creepy hot chick thinks I'm Lex Luthor. Oh, that is just wrong. Cripes. This is life or death. I'd better call for backup. Ow! Duh.
Lex, you alright?
I'm fine. No service. Man.
Are we doing this or what?
I told him you want to be alone.
We're supposed to be going over your big plan. We are still pulling the job, right? Or was the whole thing just a bluff?
Huh? I mean, right, the big plan. I'm all over the big plan. So let's go do that. What?
You gonna wash your hands?
No, 'cause I'm evil.
For me, if I was picking Clancy Brown, hands down animated. There's no other animated Lex that has done it better. But live action, man, I am torn between Rosenbaum and John Shea. John Shea from Lois and Clark. Yeah. Oh man, he was so, again, you look at that cast. Terry Hatcher, Terry Hatcher, Lane Smith as Perry White, and it's so funny when I see Shea now, or when I see him in, obviously Lois and Clark, New Adventures of Superman is what I know him from the most, but he's popped up in several Law and Order episodes, and I'm just like, what's Lex Luthor doing talking to Lenny Briscoe? Wait a minute. What kind of weird, did Michael Bailey finally, I don't know. It's one of those things where any actor, it doesn't matter who it is, I need to rediscover it, but I was never the biggest fan of Batman Brave and the Bold because I'm not really a big fan of bright, shiny Batman. I'm not a big fan of super dark Batman either. I like a nice balance between the two. Mm-hmm. But when they did the episode of Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, and as most people know, Diedrich Bader is the voice of Batman in Batman the Brave and the Bold, they went to Zur-En-Arrh, and Zur-En-Arrh I'm like, holy crap, it's Kevin Conroy. That's amazing. That kind of thing. It's like, holy crap. Just out of the, from Batman the Animated Series to Superman to this to that, to Justice League and all. Oh, it's just so fun.
Well, be careful. You might turn into Michael Bailey. It all comes back to Superman.
I actively try So Michael and I like a lot of the same things, sort of. I'm not as like I need to discover Superman for myself. Like I said, the Superman. I looked it up earlier when you were telling one of your stories. I put myself on mute and I looked it up. The 3-issue DC Black Label series that Frank Miller did was from 2019. It was Superman Year One. So he was basically telling a year one story of how, Superman, blah, 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 blah. I got to the second issue and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not into this. And then I looked at the solicits at the time for they're bringing Batman and Wonder Woman. And wait a minute, I thought this was Superman Year One, not Justice League Year One, or, the Holy Trinity of Comics Year One kind of thing. So yeah, Michael and I, between, Superman stuff and Law and Order, and we both love Cold Case, the CBS series Cold Case. So yeah, Michael's awesome. I had him on a number of years ago, and I'm trying to get him to do an audiobook episode of one of my other shows to talk about audiobooks. One of these days we'll get around to that. What is one piece of advice you would give the comics fandom?
Probably chill out. It's just you probably see it as much as I do. There's the flame wars on whatever pick your social media site. I'm pretty much only on Facebook, but I see enough of it there, and I imagine it's probably just as bad on Twitter or whatever else. But I just want to say, life is too short to get this angry at somebody else for their opinion about a fictional character. I mean, I love these fictional characters as much as anybody. And there are things I like and there are things I don't like. And if you like something I don't like, that's fine. You're allowed. I don't have to argue with you that you're wrong in your opinion. I mean, I guess some of that's an age thing. Like I said, it seems to me, it seems to be people at certain ages of their lives will more likely engage in that kind of behavior. And I probably did it myself because I think back to my early teaching years when I would get really worked up about things, and my then department head, who was much older and wiser and calmer, he would just look at me and say, "De gustibus non est disputandum," which is Latin meaning, in matters of opinion, there is no disputing. And it's like, you got to think about that. It's an opinion. Somebody else's opinion is just as good as yours. It's not a fact. It's an opinion. I like this. You like that. We can both enjoy what we enjoy. So I wish more people would really take that idea to heart, because there's no point to saying, there are stories I don't like. You heard me talk about the fact that I don't like Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, but if there are people who like it, good for them. I don't. I'm not going to read it again, and I'm probably never going to be convinced that it's a good story, but that's my opinion. And if somebody else likes it, good for you. Go enjoy it. Have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the reason, so that question is at the end of every GCRN Origins podcast, because whether it's comics, toys, Transformers, Masters of the Universe, podcasting, like, what is the one piece of advice you would give? And most everyone says, chill out, calm the fuck down, whatever it is, like seriously, like you said, these are fiction. Like, really, seriously, it's like Jay and Silent Bob from 2001 when they go see Holden McNeil, and Holden's like, these are fictional characters, and he's, it's what it is. I mean, I don't know. Can't we all just get along, please? So yeah. Well, this has been awesome. We're going to go to a quick ad break. I'll insert some ads in post-production and all that good stuff, and we'll come back to get Dave's final thoughts and close the show after this.
Hello, all sentient beings. Want the latest on everything going on in the Transformers multiverse? check out the Transmissions Podcast Network. We've got weekly podcasts covering everything from Alpha Trion to Omega Supreme, from old school G1 all the way up to Cyberverse and beyond. And you don't want to miss Empire of Rust, the world's first and only Transformers live play role-playing game podcast. If you love Transformers, there's something for everyone at transmissionspodcast.com.
You are receiving a transmission from the Rod Pod. Upload pending.
Stand by for soundtrack transfer.
I am Maggie.
And I am John.
And we are trapped, hurtling through space in a ship shaped like Rodimus's head.
The ship, for reasons we haven't been able to determine, contains the entire run of the IDW Transformers Phase 2 comic, which chronicle the events following the end of the war between the Autobots and Decepticons. So we figure we may as well read them all in order and report our findings to you. Stand by. Stand by.
Upload complete. Now.
The Rod Pod. Look for us at marriedwcomics.libsyn.com, at iTunes, at Stitcher, or wherever good podcasts can be found.
So, till all are one.
Till all are one.
Till all are one.
Hello, geeks and geekettes! Looking for a podcast that covers a vast array of topics? Then check out Altered Geek Unleashed, where we discuss our thoughts on this week's geeky news, tech, gaming, television shows, movies, cartoons, comics, and more. So, get altered, get geeky with the Altered Geeks, every Friday on the Geekcast Radio Network.
Like science fiction? Of course you do, or you wouldn't be listening to the Geekcast Radio Network. Well, the Marku 42's Universe podcast is an award-winning sci-fi radio show that's been around for over 10 years. We cover everything from Doctor Who to the MCU to pop culture and everything in between. A new show drops on Tuesday mornings on the GCRN website and all of the major podcast platforms. So listen to the Marku 42's Universe podcast from the universe and beyond.
Oh, hey! I got something!
Since 2009, we have been the premier cartoon podcast here at the Geekcast Radio Network. We are Tooncast, from taking you beyond the cartoons we grew up with to seasonal saucy toon talk, and now we get the origins of Toonsters everywhere as we ask guests 30 questions about their cartoon watching experiences, plus so much more. Tooncast is back. Join me, TFG and Mike, and the rest of the GCRN crew as we give you all the toon talk you will ever need, only on the GCRN and wherever you consume your podcasts. We are beyond good, beyond evil, beyond your wildest imagination. We are all tunes all the time here on Tooncast.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Terry Smith, the host of Music Talks, the podcast where I ask guests a simple but beguiling question. Choose a song from each decade of your life and tell me why these songs mean so much to you. Guests and listeners love this format, and if you want to find out why, then take a listen at musictalkspod.buzzsprout.com or use your favourite podcast app. Just search on Music Talks Terry Smith. If you'd like to be a guest on the show and then send me a tweet at Music Talks Pod. I look forward to doing some music talking soon.
Because the world needs another movie podcast.
The Geekcast Radio Network presents for your listening pleasure the Cinema Geek.
Hosted by Amanda, Kevin, Matt, and Dan.
Each week we dive headfirst in the landscape of movies as we discuss movie news,
play movie games,
go in-depth on reviews,
and even have a top 10 countdown or two.
Also, don't miss our Director Retrospective series, where we review noted directors' movies film by film.
Bottom line is, if you love movies and love podcasts, you need to experience the Cinema Geeks.
You can find us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, or GeekCastRadio.com.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk...
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing.
Car. Download the show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
What makes you think you can kill Superman when you can't even handle a mere mortal in a Halloween costume?
There's nothing mere about that mortal. Besides, I've read up on your flyboy. I know his weakness. See? Solid kryptonite.
You know I can't be connected to this in any way.
Oh, you'll be Mr. Clean. I promise. Deal?
Deal.
We are back here inside the pull bag. There's plenty of room in here, folks, if you want to come talk to me and get your comic reading origins on the air. Let me know. Thank you for joining us inside the pull bag. But before we do that, Dave, do you have any final thoughts, any parting advice, anything you want to say to the comic reading public that may be listening to this?
Well, like I said before with Chill Out, I would say, find what you like and enjoy it. And if there's stuff you don't like, just leave it be and don't get into arguments with people. I will also thank you for giving me something to think about, and maybe I'm going to go seek out this White Knight storyline and see where that leads me. I always like finding out something that I hadn't known about or thought about. And that's something that sounds intriguing to me.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very interesting. Sean is a big 89 animated series fan. So most of the time you see the Batmobile in the books, it's either going to be 89 or animated, or it might be his own design his own unique design that he has. Because he's writer artist. I mean, that's a 1-2 punch that, so he's doing this all himself, and it's just a fun read. I think as of this recording, because we have not done, so he has White Knight, Curse of the White Knight, which are the first 2 arcs in the series. He has White Knight Presents Von Freeze, which is a story about Mr. Freeze, which that is very interesting. And then he has White Knight Presents Harley Quinn, which is the next thing we have to do here in the podcast. And then currently he's doing Beyond the White Knight, where he goes to he brings Batman Beyond into the universe and does all kinds of cool stuff with that. And right now, we just got issue 4 out of 8. So yeah, it's fun. I will shoot you some links after the show so you can check that out. So, as I said, thank you for joining us inside the pull bag, folks. If you'd like to get in contact with us, leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment and listen to all of our content. Send us email to feedback@geekcastradio.com. If you're sending it for the pull bag, just put the pull bag and whatever subject you want to talk about or whatever. So please send us email. Here are all the ways you can listen to us nowadays. Apple and Google Podcasts. Leave us reviews, please. Spotify and any other podcatching client you choose to use. Follow us on Twitter @GeekCastRadio, @ThePullBag. I am @TFG and Mike. Dave, as far as I know, is not on Twitter, and that's okay. But, How are you? Like, I don't like. I want people to be able to interact with you if they listen to this and they want to, say hey to you or whatever. Do you want to give your Facebook out or no? Or how? Like, some people guard their Facebooks because they're like, yeah, I just want to only have these people.
No, it's Dave McElvenney on Facebook. So if
Okay.
anybody wants to look me up, they can find me.
All right, very cool, very cool. So speaking of Facebook, we are at the Geekcast Radio Network for the overall network page and at the Pullbag on Facebook as well. Please go like the pages. Join us for the next month or so when like I said, we're 4 episodes away. Well, we're technically 3 episodes away until we get to 500, but the next 4 episodes, I need comic origin guests because I've got 2 guest spots for 497 and 98, and then I promised, and she's, I don't know if we're even going to do this. We better be able to do this. But I was recording with Bethany at one point, Bethany Kessler from Superman and Lois Tapes with Michael Bailey. I was recording her origins, and she said something about her unpopular comic opinions. And I immediately said, okay, I know what episode 499 of the podcast is going to be. Well, that's coming up. So we need to get that recorded at some point. And episode 500, basically my mentor, the person who helped me out initially with setting up getting podcasting going in mid-2007 throughout 2008, Michael David Sims of at earth-2.net. He's another one of those guys, kind of like you, where, like you were telling the story earlier about the Batman and Robin comic and how you remember what happened. He's one of those guys where you can, say something like you could say Batman 439 or Batman 571 or whatever, and he'll immediately be like, oh, it was this story, it was that story. So he's another one of those types of people. So yeah, folks, we are on our way to 500 episodes, and it's going to be fun and awesome, as always, here inside the Pullbag. For now, I am TFG and Mike with
Dave McElvenney.
As always, make your great escape into comics and jump inside the Pullbag today.
Thanks, Mike.
Call the clown. I need one last meeting.
How could you have lied to me like that?
Now, I never actually said I wasn't Batman.
Ow!
You want to know what really galls me? I mean, beside the fact that the new man in my life is really 2 men, it's that I'm sitting on the hottest story of the year, Batman, unmasked, and there's not a blessed thing I can do about it.
Then you really do love me.
I'll get some iodine for that scrape. Burning, stinging iodine.
I see she's taking it well.
It's ironic, you know. She likes Bruce Wayne and she likes Superman. It's the other 2 guys she's not crazy about.
Too bad we can't mix and match.
I'm not used to being rescued. Thanks.
I owed you one.
That robot tonight, it came from LexCorp. I can prove it.
That's why I'm here. I figured you might want to help me bring Luthor in.
A partnership? You're joking.
You've just heard the latest episode of The Pullbag, the GCRN's first comic review and discussion podcast. There are several ways to get in touch with us and leave feedback for the show. You can visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on the episode and all of our different podcasts. You can rate and leave a review for the show on iTunes. Be sure to leave us feedback. Become a fan of us on Facebook, facebook.com/thepullbag. Send us an email, feedback at geekcastradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at thepullbag and at geekcastradio. So until next time, make your great escape into comics and unleash the geek in you.
Let me guess, you're the only one here.
How do I contact Superman?
He's out at sea.
Never around when you need him.